Hello and welcome to It's Free IP. I'm your host Felix Chaplin, and today I'd like to teach you about what the music industry was like 100 years ago. Before I get started, I'd like to encourage you to subscribe to this channel and to check out our show Pussyville. It's like if Sesame Street and Bluey were made for young adults, teaching life skills and how to adult. If you feel so inclined, you can also send some money on Ko-fi, which is linked in the description. With all that out of the way, let's get on with the video. As someone born in the mid-90s, the music industry has gone through quite a few changes just in my own lifetime. I remember listening to CDs as a kid. I remember recording music that was playing on the radio onto tapes. I even remember when the iPod was brand new. Even in our age of Spotify, iTunes, and the like, there are some aspects of the music industry that we take for granted. We take for granted that a recording of a song is the song. We take for granted that singers write their own songs. We even take for granted that the original artist that recorded the song owns it, and any other artist that records their own rendition of it is simply covering it. But if we go back in time 70 years to 1953, none of these things that we take for granted today were the norm in the music industry. That's because 1953 was the tail end of the age known as the Tin Pan Alley era. The Tin Pan Alley era was the era in American popular music that lasted from the 1890s to the mid-1950s, and was named after the area in New York City in which a group of sheet music publishers were based. Before this time period, if you wanted to hear the latest hit song, you either had to buy the sheet music to play it yourself, go to a concert hall or minstrel show to hear it performed live, or go to a saloon to sing along with your drinking buddies. That would start to change in the late 1880s when the phonograph and gramophone started to be displayed in traveling exhibitions. A quick side note about the phonograph and gramophone, neither of these devices used electricity. They recorded and played back audio entirely mechanically and acoustically. A band or singer would play or sing in front of a big metal horn. The sound waves would travel down to a vibrating diaphragm connected to a recording stylus, which in turn would etch those vibrations into the record. To play the recordings back, the playback needle would travel through the grooves in the record, causing the diaphragm to vibrate the same way it did when it was recording. The sound waves would travel up out of the horn, and you'd hear what had been recorded. Now back to the main topic. In spite of the fact that audio recording and playback technology were now commercially available, songs were still primarily distributed in the form of sheet music. From a business standpoint, this makes sense. Why take your chances on a new singer-songwriter when you can just buy the rights to songs that are already selling well as sheet music? The first singer to make records for commercial purposes was a black man named George W. Johnson. He had been born into slavery sometime in the late 1840s to the early 1850s, eventually moved to New York City in the 1870s or so to find work, and would make some money by singing and whistling on street corners. This is how he was discovered. Acoustic recording technology wasn't very sensitive, so Johnson's strong voice and loud whistling were ideal for making phonograph records. Phonographs used cylinder records, and at this point in their development, there was no way to mass-produce copies from a single master, which was an advantage that the gramophone and its disc records had over the phonograph, and ended up winning the format war. As a result, George W. Johnson had to sing the same song up to 50 times a day in front of multiple phonographs recording simultaneously in order to meet sales demands. Sadly, by the end of the 1890s, George W. Johnson's popularity had declined, and record companies had moved on to contracting white minstrel performers like Billy Murray, Arthur Collins, Ada Jones, and so on. Johnson ended up dying penniless and was buried in a pauper's grave. From the very beginning, black people have been getting chewed up and spit out by the music industry, and black music has always been demonized by white Americans. In most recent memory is hip-hop, rock and roll before that, and jazz before that. In the 1890s to 1900s, ragtime was called the devil's music, and white preachers claimed that it would bring the downfall of society. American popular music had its roots in classical music, as is very evident in popular songs from the 1890s and 1900s. There was a subgenre of popular music at the time that incorporated ragtime in it. Unfortunately, that subgenre became known as coon songs. These songs evolved from minstrel music, and George W. Johnson's biggest hits, the laughing song and the whistling coon, were part of this subgenre.
As I was coming around the corner, I heard some people say, "Here comes the dandy darky, here he comes this way. His heel is like a snowplow, his mouth is like a trap, and when he opens it gently, you will see a fearful gap as that I laugh." I've seen in the time some very funny folk about the funny rhino. You got to look in the visual. Well, there's laughter and the black road. You can talk till you can, but you never get the word. Very funny for your own food. You not need some Johnny Money. But the rapping way is
Former minstrel performer Ernest Hogan published the first ragtime song, La Pa Mala, in 1895. and the first ragtime coon song the following year. The lyrics of these songs were generally written phonetically in a stereotypical black scent, such as using am as the only present tense conjugation of the verb to be. Funnily enough, the word coon was seen as a more politically correct alternative to the N-word at the time, so the former was a lot more common in these songs than the latter. The lyrical content of these songs range from being extremely racist to being fairly benign, with some of them still being well known today.
They can play a bugle call like you never heard before. So natural that you want to go to war. That's just the best that's been. What am, oh honey lamb.
Rufus Rastus Johnson Brown. What you gonna do when the rain comes around? What you gonna say? How you gonna pay? You'll never have a bit of sense of judgment day.
But the cat came back, couldn't stay no longer. Yes, the cat came back the very next day.
Hello, my baby. Hello, my honey. Hello, my ragtime gal.
Even Scott Joplin, known as the king of ragtime and most famous for his hits The Maple Leaf Rag and The Entertainer, wrote a ragtime song that used the word coon a couple times. The Ragtime Dance from 1902.
I attended a ball last Thursday night, given by the Darktown swells. Every coon came out in full dress, all right, and the girls were society belles.
For better or for worse, the song was re-released in 1906 without lyrics, and this is the more widely known version of the song. American popular music had a tendency to take other genres of music and strip them down to their basic elements to be easier for the average person to play. Waltzes and foxtrots are good examples of this. When proper ragtime started to lose its popularity towards the end of the 1900s, it was revived in a simplified form in the 1910s by songwriters like Irving Berlin. These simplified versions were actually just marches that didn't have syncopation, but that didn't stop the songwriters from calling them rags. Popular ragtime started to die out in the late 1910s and gave way to jazz. Just like how Elvis Presley would be crowned the king of rock and roll by putting a white face on the genre, Paul Whiteman would be known as the king of jazz for the same reason, though his particular form of jazz was watered down by classical influence and isn't really what we normally think of as jazz. When one listens to Tin Pan Alley songs today, one can't help but notice that a lot of these songs are pretty happy sounding, and there are a lot of novelty songs. Bananas were particularly popular subjects for these songs.
Yes, we have no bananas. We have no bananas today.
I have seen them by the carload on the Delaware and Lackawanna.
But we've never, we've never seen a straight banana.
I don't like your peaches, they are full of stones. I like bananas because they have no bones.
Lots of songs from this era had very long titles, often a full line from the song so you'd get the melody stuck in your head.
He'd have to get under, get out and get under, and fix up his automobile. Any little girl that's a nice little girl
Is the right little girl for me.
Everybody loves my baby, but my baby don't love nobody but me. Oh, how I laugh when I think how I cried about you.
Some notable songwriters from the Tin Pan Alley era include Harry Von Tilser,
He's only a bird in a gilded cage, a beautiful sight to see.
Albert Von Tilser,
Takes me out to the ball game, takes me out with the crowd. Oh, buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jack. I don't care if I never get back.
Fred Fisher,
Take off my heart, I love you, we'll never part, I love you.
Chicago, Chicago, that toddling town. Chicago, Chicago, I will show you around.
Milton Ager,
Ain't she sweet? See her coming down the street. Now I ask you very confidentially, ain't she sweet?
Cole Porter,
Birds do it, bees do it, even educated fleas do it. Let's do it, let's fall in love.
I've got
and in a league of his own, the undisputed champion of the Tin Pan Alley era, Irving Berlin.
God bless America, land that I love.
Remember the night you said I love you. Remember
Heaven, I'm in heaven, and my heart beats so that I can hardly speak. I'm dreaming of a white Christmas. And if I ever lost you, how much would I cry? How deep is the ocean? How high is the sky?
If you're blue and you don't know where to go to, why don't you go where fashion sits?
When I'm alone with only dreams of you that won't come true, what'll I do?
Recording technology improved, and record players became more common in the homes of average Americans. And by the 1950s, the baby boomers were refusing to learn to play the piano, preferring to listen to records instead. Then rock and roll came onto the scene in the mid-1950s, dethroning popular music as the dominant music genre in America. In spite of all the changes that were made to the music industry along the way, things are starting to come full circle as the music of the Tin Pan Alley era enters the public domain in the US. Now anyone can just go online, find sheet music from this time period, and record these old songs and do what they want with them. That's all the time we have for today's video. Did you find this video informative? Be sure to let me know what you think in the comments. While you're down there, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, subscribe if you haven't already, and ring the notification bell so you won't miss what comes next from It's Free IP.